This week, you read about personal stories to energize your arguments, and you'll engage in some self-reflection and critical thinking about your reading. In this video lecture, we're going to introduce some new concepts, connect to your reading, and connect to the project you're working on right now. Before we start though, I do want to tell you a story. When I left for graduate school, I was talking to one of my parents' neighbors. He was wishing me well, helping send me off, and as he and I were talking, I told him how excited I was to keep learning. He looked at me, he tilted his head to the side, and after a moment of staring at me, he went, "Well, just don't get too smart, then you won't be yourself anymore." Well, at first, this sounds incredibly rude, implying that I'm not very smart. That's not how he meant it. Instead, he was warning me against becoming one of the intellectual academics that loses their ability to talk normally with people. Someone who is so wrapped up in academia that they forget not everybody has the same knowledge that they do. Or like someone who gets frustrated when you don't understand complex concepts with a brief, bad explanation from them. My parents' neighbor, you see, is a smart man, and he was smart in a different kind of way. He is someone who worked with his hands for a career and he didn't go to school. He possessed a different type of knowledge than me, studying rhetoric and composition. Both are valuable, but they're seen at a societal level in a different way. Antonio Gramsci is a scholar that a lot of people have a lot of different feelings about, and we aren't going to dive into his writing in this class, but we are going to consider one of his proposals. He theorized that everyone is an intellectual. This means that everyone is an expert in a particular area. This is a departure from how people typically think of intellectuals. So he presented two types of intellectuals, traditional and organic. So traditional intellectuals are people who gain their expertise or their knowledge in an academic setting. You, right now, are leaning into the concept of a traditional intellectual. You're gaining knowledge in a particular area, hoping to use that knowledge someday in your subsequent career. Organic intellectuals, however, gain their knowledge from lived experience. They might not have a formal degree in something. They have their knowledge from what they've done throughout their life. So in your reading for this week, it tells the story of Mike Rose's mom, who was a server, and she had a specific kind of knowledge and expertise that isn't easy to replicate without the experience that she had on a daily basis. Her intellect, her intelligence was based in her work as a waitress. She only had a 7th grade education, but she was still successful in her career path because of that organic intellectualism. You likely already know about the importance of telling a personal story in your writing. It's often presented as a way to hook your reader at the beginning of a piece of writing, and it's something that gets advised a lot in speech classes. It's a way to get your audience interested and invested in what you have to say because you give them a figure to get engaged with. A story makes concepts easier to follow than deep theory. In the project you're working on right now, you are developing a personal story. You're telling the story of your week through data. You're telling the story of whatever your topic is, and you are inherent in the research. And a lot of times in research, we tend to lose this concept. So Georgia Lupi, who started the Dear Data project with Stephanie Posavec, recognizes this. In a TED Talk from 2017, she talks about how we are so driven to reduce information into tiny parts. We want to look at a map, pretty map, with blue and red states that'll show who will win the presidency. We want to see things boiled down to 1 or 2 easy to understand numbers that gives us some sense of what's going on. Lupi argues, though, that boiling data down like this does us a disservice. When we do that, it eliminates context. It eliminates nuance. And as much as we'd like to think that the world operates in black and white, a lot of it happens in the gray, which is what you saw with the They Say project. What we should adopt instead, Lupi says, is data humanism. So data humanism looks to put the human at the center of data, not the numbers, but the human stories behind the numbers. And that's exactly what you're doing in your projects. You're collecting data, but it's another way to think about where data comes from. In this case, it's coming directly from your life. And as you get into visualizing the data, you want to show us the story from your week. So how can you represent your data in a way that represents you? When you go to design your data, there are a series of steps that you can follow. These come from an article by Anne Emery, who works full-time in designing data presentations. She suggests a 6-step process for beginners. Understand our audiences, choose the right chart, select a software program, declutter, clarify with color, and clarify with text. So when we think about your audience for this project, you're writing to someone who doesn't know you, and you're writing for yourself. Those are the two audiences described on the assignment sheet for this project. Part of this has to do with detail. You want to show detail. This is not just basic information. You're telling a part of who you are. So give us detail. You might need multiple charts or multiple ways of showing your data. That's totally fine. As you show that, you can think about, what does your personal style look like, and how can you incorporate that into your visualization? With choosing the right chart, it's recommended that you brainstorm and try to sketch out some ideas about how you might represent your data first, and then you can get a better idea of what you want and what you might do with it. From there, you can get into picking what software, if any, you'd like to use. For selecting a software, you can think about what platforms you're familiar with. So one of my students this week waxed poetic during class about how she loves Excel. If you've got the Excel expertise, go for it. If you want to try a new platform for you to learn, you can go for it. Things like Canva are accessible for free, and you can design your data on there. I think it can be easier than Google Sheets or Excel, but that's up to you. You can also forget the software entirely and do your project on a physical piece of paper. When you declutter, this is like our visual version of revising. So when you revise your visualization, we want to look for places that you can cut down on busyness. You can represent a lot of detail in your data without making it look busy. So Emery recommends the squint test, where you squint your eyes and look for places where it's hard to tell what the data means. You want to be able to squint and still get the same message as when your eyes are fully open. You also want to make sure that there's contrast in your work that helps you see more of the design. Contrast is something to consider when we look to clarify with color too. So you can think about what sort of a color palette you would like to have. I like to use this website, Coolers, which generates color palettes for you. You can lock certain colors if you like them. You can add more or delete colors just for what you want. And they also provide the hex codes at the bottom, which you can copy and paste into different design platforms to get that specific color. Anytime that we select colors, we want to make sure that they're accessible for our audience. You can do this using a tool that's linked in Canvas under the examples module for this project. So you put in the color that you want, and then you can see if it's considered accessible. So you put it in the foreground or in the background. So here I'll put it in the foreground, so it's the color of the text against a white background. And then you can check and see if it is considered accessible. If it doesn't pass, you can try and flip it with black and then see how it measures up. If it doesn't fail, or it doesn't pass that and it fails again, then you need to pick a different color. When you clarify your design with text, part of that means picking the right fonts. So defont.com, which makes me feel like a fool every time I have to say it out loud, has some great options that you can access for free. You are not required to use anything like this, but it could be worth considering taking a look at. When you pick fonts, you want to make sure that they match the tone of the project. For instance, if you're collecting data on how many times you felt joyful throughout the week, you might avoid going for something like Times New Roman. I don't know about you, but Times New Roman does not scream joy to me. And on the flip side, picking a flouncy, fun, handwritten sort of font wouldn't work super well for something like how many times you cried in the past week. You also want to be thoughtful about the title that you put on your graph. So what do you want your audience to know about your data at first glance? Let that dictate how you title your visualization. So you can have some fun with it and still be creative, but the purpose should drive it. We've covered a lot in the video lecture this week, but hopefully you're seeing how all of these little pieces connect to help build you up for your project. If you've got any questions as you work on it, please let me know.